Hello again guys, and this is part 3 of our Lord of the Rings tutorial here in Blender. And what we're going to be doing now is putting our image map onto here. So I've already prepared the inscriptions as a PNG file. Again, you can download that from the zip file which is included at the bottom of this video in the link in the description. You'll be able to find all of the maps and everything that you need there. So we've got our basic gold texture and we're going to be building on this. So what we're going to need to do first of all is actually do our UV unwrapping. So we can come out of rendered mode. I'm going to open up our UV image editor here and I'm going to load up a new image. So from our textures, we're going to start off by doing the outer part of the ring. So we want to choose our texture, which is one ring outer. That's this one here. So there is our PNG image for the outer. Now we'll select our ring. We'll tab into edit mode. Now the thing we're going to want to actually do is apply our modifiers before we do any of this. So all these modifiers here, we will apply those. That now gives us this solid mesh all the way around there. Actually, we only need to apply the solidify modifier. We'll leave the subdivision surface modifier there. Makes our mesh easier to deal with. Okay, so first thing we're going to need to do is mark our seam. So the seam I'm going to place somewhere around the back there where it's not going to be seen. So I'm going to select these edges. Will be these edges here. Okay. Once I've selected those edges, I'm going to go to Mesh and Edges, Mark Seam. The next thing we're going to need to do is go to Face Select mode, and I'm going to grab all these faces around here. So these are the faces that actually have they're going to have the inscription on them. So I'm going to grab hold of all those faces there, and we'll go to the front view, and I'm going to go to Mesh, UV Unwrap, Cylinder Projection. Now over here, you'll see we have everything unwrapped. Now I'm going to scale this up so that our text sits inside the bounds of that line there. So that's all we're going to do for now. We're going to switch back over into the node editor. And we'll leave that in solid view just for the moment. Okay, so here in the node editor we already have our basic gold texture. And so I'm going to add another. Put the gold texture in, but I'm going to give it its own duplicate that gold texture, and we're going to call this the outer ring. This is our outer ring texture. And we're going to build on this gold texture that we've already created there. So switch back over to our UV mapping for a moment, because we're going to have multiple maps on here, and you can see here now we have UV map. I'm just going to change this one to outer ring. So that's our outer ring map, because we're going to have another map for the inner ring. So just make sure here you've named your UV map outer ring. We're going to create another one later. We'll get to that in a moment. So back to the node editor. We're going to add into here a UV map node. And in the name of the UV map, we're going to choose outer ring. Then we will add a image texture. Control T. We're just going to remove that texture coordinates, and we'll plug the UV map into there. So what we have now, take a closer look at this, we have UV map, and we've chosen our outer ring UV map. We have mapping plugged into our image texture, and in our image texture here we're going to choose that same one ring outer texture. Okay, now that is a PNG file, so it has some transparency to it. So we need to tell our shader to have that as transparent. So, and also as well, we want to have some bumps to this as also. So this is going to be a little bit complex to set up, but try and explain it as best as I can. So coming out of this image texture here, we're going to add an invert shader, and into the invert we're going to plug the color of our texture, goes into there, and next along there then we're going to add a diffuse, and the color is going to plug into there, and this diffuse texture is going to come out to a mix shader, not mix RGB, just a mix shader. Diffuse color will plug into this. Okay, now the alpha from our image texture is also going to be plugged into somewhere, and we're also going to bring out another color from our image texture, which will go to the bump map. So we will add a bump, and again the color from our image texture will go into the height of this bump map. And then the normal of this bump is going to go into the normal of our diffuse. Now into this mix shader we're going to add a glossy shader. And they're going to add another mix shader, and plugged into this we'll plug the output of this mix shader plus an emission shader. And then into the factor of here we're going to plug the alpha of our image texture. So as you can see, this is starting to look a little bit cluttered, but I'm going to run you through it again. So from the beginning here we have our UV map, which is set to the outer ring. That's the UV mapping coordinates that we created. Plugs into mapping, plugs into our image texture. From the image texture we have the color going into a diffuse, invert and diffuse, and also the color is going into a bump, which is also connected to that same diffuse there. Okay, that goes into a mix shader, which has a glossy shader plugged into it, and the mix shader plugs into another mix shader which has an emission, and the factor is plugged into the alpha of our image texture. Now we're going to add in one more mix shader. And plugged into this will be the output of this mix shader and a transparent shader, which will plug into there. And then all of this is going to go into one final mix shader, into which we also plug the output of our previous gold texture, and that all goes to the material output. So basically down here we have our original gold texture, which is plugging into a mix shader and is being mixed with everything else from the top here, which we just created. So I think we have all of that set up correctly now. Let's take a look at our rendered output. Let's go to a camera view. Okay. If we hit Control and Shift, we can view things as we go along. All right. So something isn't quite right here so far. I think it's to do with our pass indexes. We need to okay. I know what we've got to do. We need to assign that outer ring texture to our object. Forgot about that. So we come back over here to solid. So we have these selected, but we need to assign this texture to that, which we hadn't done. So we hit assign. Now come back to rendered. There we go. We've got to assign this outer ring texture to there. Okay, so you can see now that we have the texture being displayed, but things are not looking quite right. It's white. So there's a few things that we need to edit coming along here. So one of those is our emission here. We want to change this emission to be a little bit towards a kind of goldish, orangey red. This is going to be the kind of fire bit which is going to be shining out from our ring here. So you want to get the color of this flame about right. So you may want to go more towards a red area, reddy gold. Should be good. Okay, now a glossy shader, we also then need to set this to be more towards the gold area. We can drag the factor of this up. I'm just going to plug in the output of this into there. We'll remove this glossy shader. Okay, so the output now from our original gold shader is also now plugging in. So there's our gold shader, and we're plugging that into the mix shader at the end, and we're also plugging it into our mix shader up here, where we're mixing it together with everything else. So I want to set that mix to 100. Okay, so that is basically it for setting up our nodes there. I know this is quite a complex setup, so I'm just going to take you through it one more time. We've done a UV unwrap. We have a UV mapping node, which is assigned to the outer ring UV unwrap. Going into our mapping, goes into our image texture, where we have loaded the texture that we are using, which is the text, the inscription which goes onto the ring. The alpha of that is plugged into our mix shader over here. The color of that goes to our bump map and also to an invert and a diffuse. Those are plugged into a mix shader where we have plugged in our original gold texture, which comes down to another mix shader where we have an emission plugged in, which comes to another mix shader where we have a transparency, which comes to a final mix shader where we are mixing our original gold surface and what we just created back there. So this is our final mix shader here. You'll see that if we just skip back one there, we have this kind of ghosting and reflections going on in the background there. Now that can be turned off by going to the properties of our object, and in the cycle settings, turning off glossy. You'll see that now you don't get those reflections in the background there. So if you do get this problem, turn off glossy, and that will help you with solving that issue. Now by altering the mix here between the two mix shaders, you can choose how bright this emission area is going to be. So we can do the fine adjusting later on. One last thing we may want to do is go back to our UV image editor. Now if you want to adjust where the inscription is, you can hit G and X. We can move this around. Now you'll see that it's going all the way around because it's repeating. So to turn that off, back in our node editor, under the image texture, instead of repeat, we'll just go to extend. So now when we come back to a UV and we drag this, we can have the text just once being displayed on the ring. And I want it at that slight angle like that. Now if you want to make the text a little bit longer, you can hit S to scale. We can scale in the X axis until you get the proportions however you want them. That's about right for me. Now we're basically going to do exactly the same for the inside of the ring. So we can save ourselves a lot of node work by copying the same texture and just making a few small adjustments. So first of all, come back into a solid view. I'm going to select an inside edge, which is at the front here, and we want to mark another seam. So edge select, I'm going to select this edge here because this edge is facing away from the camera. So you want to try and hide your seams where the camera isn't going to see them, if at all possible. So I'm going to mark this as a seam. So mesh, edges, mark seam, face select. I'm going to grab hold of these faces here. I'll go to a front view. Now we're going to create a new UV map, which we'll call the inner ring. We're going to load a new image, which will be our one ring inscription inner. Excellent. And mesh, UV unwrap, cylinder projection. And again, we'll scale this up so that the text fits inside of those faces of the ring. Come over to our materials. We're going to create a new material. Choose outer ring 01. We'll change this one to outer ring. And we change this to inner ring. Now remember what we called this texture, also inner ring. So when we come over now to our node editor, we just have to make a few small changes. One is to choose inner ring from our texture map there. The other is to choose the inner ring inscription image. Now we should also get the text showing up on the inside as well. Let's see. Quite okay. Let's go back to the camera view. Let's find out what's going on there. Again, we need to do the assign. Same mistake I made last time. Sorry about that. Tap back into edit mode, inner ring, and assign. There we go. Okay, so now we have the text on the inside of our ring as well. Now we just want to adjust that. We'll go to UV image editor. Drag this around, depends on how much of text we want to be seen. And I think this text has been flipped, so over in our node editor, go to the rotation, and I think we'll change that to 180. I think that will flip the text around. So it's now the correct way. Yes, there we go. Now the text is the right way around, and I'm going to move that around here. Okay. So there we have our basic setup of the ring using the node editor. A little bit complicated, like I said. I'm just going to switch over into node editor one more time so you can see how these nodes are set up. Also as well, I'm going to include a screenshot of this in the zip file that you can download at the bottom. And you can also download the actual project file so you can see these nodes yourself, and you can play around with it yourself in Blender, and you can see how I've got everything connected up. It took me a while to figure out how to connect up these nodes to give the desired result. So I'm saving you quite a bit of work here. But that is effectively how we use a PNG, add it onto our surface, and make it look like it's glowing. So quite a complex setup of the nodes there, but it really does give a nice result. And in the next part of the tutorial, we're going to be doing some compositing to this to give it the kind of sparkly effect and some of the other small effects that we want to have that will just really finish off this image. So sorry that this was a little bit long, and hope you were able to follow it. I tried to make it as simple as I could. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.